The dust kicked up beneath the hooves of Vincent Anders' horse as he rode into the valley where the Crawford ranch sat, the sun burning hot against his back, and what he saw through the cabin window made his blood run cold. Vincent had been riding the trail between Julian, California and San Diego for 3 years now, carrying mail and small packages, earning his living as one of the most reliable couriers in San Diego County. It was 1878, and the small mining town of Julian had seen better days since the gold rush of '69, but enough families had stayed to make a decent community. The Crawford ranch sat about 5 miles outside town, a modest spread with cattle grazing the hills and a 2-story house that spoke of moderate prosperity. Vincent had delivered packages here before, usually leaving them on the porch if no one answered, but today he had a registered letter that required a signature. He dismounted, tying his bay gelding to the hitching post, and that was when he heard it. A woman's cry, sharp and afraid, followed by the crash of something breaking. Vincent's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, but he hesitated. A man's home was his castle out here, and interfering in domestic matters could get you shot regardless of the circumstances. But then he heard a child crying, and the sound of a hand striking flesh. Vincent moved closer to the window, keeping to the side where he would not be easily seen. Through the dusty glass, he watched as Thomas Crawford, a well-dressed man of about 35 with slicked-back dark hair, backhanded his elderly mother across the face. The woman, who could not have been more than 60 but looked older from hardship, stumbled backward against the table. 2 children, a boy and a girl no older than 8 and 6, huddled in the corner, tears streaming down their faces. "You stupid woman," Thomas Crawford snarled, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "I told you to have supper ready by the time I returned. Do I have to beat sense into you the way I did your worthless husband before he died?" Vincent's jaw clenched. He had heard rumors in town about Thomas Crawford, whispers that his father's death last year had not been entirely natural, that the old man had taken a convenient fall down the stairs after an argument with his son. But rumors were one thing. Witnessing this was another matter entirely. The elderly woman tried to speak, but Thomas struck her again, and she collapsed to the floor. The children screamed, and the boy tried to run to his grandmother, but Thomas grabbed him by the collar and threw him back against the wall with such force that Vincent heard the impact from outside. That was enough. Vincent did not care about property rights or social conventions. He strode to the front door and pounded on it with his fist. "Mail delivery! Registered letter for Thomas Crawford!" The sounds inside stopped immediately. Vincent heard shuffling, whispered threats, and then footsteps approaching the door. It swung open, and Thomas Crawford stood there, his face flushed but his expression carefully composed into a pleasant smile. He was tall, well-built, and wore expensive clothes that seemed out of place on a ranch. Vincent, is it not? The mail courier. Come in, come in." Thomas stepped aside, gesturing broadly. Vincent entered, his eyes immediately finding the elderly woman who was now sitting at the table, holding a cloth to her bleeding lip. The children had vanished, presumably sent to another room. The broken dish had been swept aside, but shards still glittered on the floor. "I need your signature for this letter," Vincent said, his voice carefully neutral as he held out the envelope in a small ledger. His eyes, however, moved from the woman's injured face to Thomas, and he made sure the rancher knew he was looking. Thomas's smile faded slightly. "My mother is clumsy. She fell while preparing supper. It is quite embarrassing at her age." The elderly woman said nothing, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling as she held the cloth to her mouth. Vincent held Thomas's gaze steadily. "That must have been quite a fall. Looks like she might need a doctor." "We take care of our own," Thomas said, his voice hardening. He snatched the ledger and scrawled his signature across it. "Is there anything else?" "No," Vincent said slowly, "but I will be back this way in 3 days with another delivery. I hope everyone is doing better by then." It was a subtle warning, and Thomas understood it. His eyes narrowed, and his hand moved to rest on the knife at his belt. "You mind your business, courier, and I will mind mine. What happens in a man's house is between him and God." Vincent tipped his hat, his expression giving nothing away, but as he turned to leave, his eyes met those of the elderly woman. In that brief moment, he saw not just pain, but desperate, silent pleading. She could not speak, could not ask for help, but her eyes begged him not to abandon them to this man's cruelty. He rode away from the Crawford ranch with a heavy weight in his chest. The letter he had delivered was from San Francisco, likely business correspondence, but what occupied his mind was not mail routes or delivery schedules. It was the image of that woman's battered face and those terrified children. When Vincent returned to Julian that evening, he stopped at the general store where Ephraim Taylor, the proprietor, was closing up for the day. Ephraim was a round man in his 50s with gray mutton chops and a friendly disposition. He knew everything about everyone in Julian, and if Vincent wanted information, this was the place to start. "Evening, Vincent," Ephraim called out, sweeping the wooden porch. "You look troubled. Bad day on the trail?" "You could say that." Vincent dismounted and leaned against the porch railing. "Tell me about Thomas Crawford." Ephraim's cheerful expression faded. He glanced around to make sure no one else was within earshot, then set his broom aside. "Why do you ask?" "I delivered mail to his ranch today. Saw some things that did not sit right with me." The older man sighed heavily. "Thomas Crawford is a dangerous man, Vincent. His father, Robert, was a good man, honest and hardworking. Built that ranch from nothing after the gold rush ended. But Thomas was always different. Mean streak a mile wide, even as a boy. After Robert died last year, Thomas took over everything. His mother, Martha, she lives with him because she has nowhere else to go. The children are Thomas's niece and nephew. Their parents, Thomas's sister and her husband, died of fever 2 years back, and Martha took them in. Now they are all trapped under Thomas's roof." "Why does not someone do something?" Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer. "Like what?" "Sheriff Dalton will not interfere in family matters unless someone files a complaint, and who is going to do that? Martha. She is terrified of her son. The children, they are too young, and everyone else just minds their own business." Ephraim shook his head sadly. "Besides, Thomas has money and influence. He bought out 3 smaller ranches last year, paid cash. Some folks think he is the future of this area, and they do not want to cross him." Vincent was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he asked, "What about marriage? I heard he is engaged." "Oh yes," Ephraim said, his expression growing even more grim. "To Zara Jenkins, prettiest girl in Julian, and the sweetest too. Her father, William Jenkins, owns the livery stable. He's pushing hard for the marriage. Thomas has been courting her for 6 months now, always the perfect gentleman in public. The wedding is set for 3 weeks from now. Poor girl has no idea what kind of man she is marrying." Vincent felt his stomach tighten. Someone should tell her. Who? On what evidence? Thomas's behavior at home is private. No one has proof of anything. And if someone tried to spread rumors without proof, Thomas would likely sue them for slander or worse. Ephraim picked up his broom again. "I am sorry, Vincent, but that is the way of things. Sometimes bad men win, and there's nothing anyone can do about it." But Vincent could not accept that. As he walked his horse to the small boarding house where he rented a room, his mind worked through the problem. He had witnessed Thomas Crawford striking his mother and throwing a child against a wall. That was not rumor or hearsay. That was fact. But would anyone believe him? He was just a mail courier, a drifter with no real ties to the community. Thomas was a wealthy landowner with friends in high places. More importantly, how could he approach Zara Jenkins? He had seen her around town, of course. She was 22 years old, with long chestnut hair that caught the sunlight, warm hazel eyes, and a smile that made people feel like they mattered. She worked at her father's livery stable, gentle with the horses and kind to customers. Vincent had exchanged pleasantries with her a few times when boarding his horse, but they were not friends. What right did he have to interfere in her life? Yet the image of Martha Crawford's bleeding lip and those crying children haunted him. If Zara married Thomas, she would be trapped in that house, subject to his rages. And if they had children together, those innocent souls would grow up in fear and violence. Vincent made his decision. He would tell Zara what he had witnessed. If she believed him, she could break off the engagement. If she did not, at least he would have tried. His conscience would be clear. The next morning, Vincent rode into town and went directly to Jenkins' livery. It was a large barn on the east side of town, always bustling with activity. William Jenkins ran a good business, offering boarding, shoeing, and wagon repairs. As Vincent approached, he saw Zara in the corral, working with a young mare that seemed skittish. She wore a simple calico dress with an apron over it, her hair tied back in a practical bun, and she moved with confident grace as she spoke softly to the horse. "Easy now," she murmured, holding out an apple slice. "No one is going to hurt you. You are safe here." The mare, a pretty chestnut with a white blaze, took tentative steps forward and finally accepted the treat. Zara stroked her neck gently, still speaking in that calm, soothing voice. Vincent watched for a moment, struck by her patience and kindness. Then he cleared his throat. "Miss Jenkins?" She turned, surprised, and smiled when she saw him. "Oh, hello, Mr. Anders. Do you need to board your horse?" "Actually, I was hoping I could speak with you privately. It is a matter of some importance." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by curiosity and a hint of concern. "Of course. Let me just finish with Daisy here." She gave the mare a final pat and climbed over the corral fence with practiced ease. "We can talk in the office. My father's out delivering a repaired wagon, so we will not be disturbed." She led him to a small office attached to the barn, a cluttered space with a desk covered in papers, ledgers, and horseshoe catalogs. The smell of leather and hay filled the air. Zara gestured to a chair and took a seat behind the desk, folding her hands and looking at him expectantly. "What is this about, Mr. Anders?" Vincent removed his hat and turned it nervously in his hands. Now that the moment had arrived, he found it difficult to begin. "How did you tell a woman that her fiancé was a violent brute?" "Miss Jenkins, I delivered mail to the Crawford ranch yesterday. While I was there, I witnessed something that troubles me greatly." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I saw Thomas Crawford strike his mother across the face twice. I saw him throw one of the children against a wall. The old woman was bleeding, and the children were terrified." Zara's face went pale. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at him with wide eyes. Then she stood abruptly and walked to the small window that overlooked the corral. Her back was to him, and her shoulders were tense. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Anders," she said quietly. "I know, and I would not make it if I had not seen it with my own eyes." "Why are you telling me this?" She still did not turn around. "Because you are engaged to marry him. Because once you are his wife, you will be in that house, subject to his temper. Because I could not live with myself if I stayed silent and something happened to you." She turned then, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Do you think I want to marry him?" The question caught Vincent off guard. I assumed." "You assumed wrong." She laughed bitterly and wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thomas Crawford proposed 6 months ago, and my father accepted on my behalf. He did not ask what I wanted. He did not care. Thomas has money, status, and my father sees this marriage as advantageous for our family. I have tried to tell my father that something about Thomas feels wrong, that he makes me uncomfortable, but he will not listen. He says I am being foolish and romantic, that marriage is a practical arrangement, not a fairy tale." Vincent stood slowly, his heart aching for her. "What does Thomas do that makes you uncomfortable?" Zara hugged herself, looking vulnerable and young. "He's always perfectly polite in public, always says the right things. But sometimes, when no one else is watching, I catch him looking at me in a way that frightens me. Once, when we were alone in his parlor, he grabbed my wrist too tightly and told me that once we were married, I would learn to obey him properly. When I pulled away, he laughed and said he was joking, but his eyes were cold." "Then break off the engagement," Vincent said urgently. "If you do not want to marry him, do not." "It is not that simple," she said miserably. "My father has already accepted money from Thomas as part of the arrangement. Not quite a bride price, but a substantial investment in the livery business. If I refused to marry Thomas now, my father would be ruined financially. And Thomas would make sure everyone in Julian knew that I broke my word. My reputation would be destroyed, and my family would be disgraced." Vincent felt anger rising in his chest, not at Zara, but at the impossible situation she found herself in. "So your father sold you?" "Essentially, yes." She met his eyes, and in that moment, Vincent saw strength beneath her fear. "But I would rather face disgrace than marry a man who beats his own mother. If what you are telling me is true, if you are certain of what you saw, then I will break the engagement. Consequences be damned." "I am certain," Vincent said firmly. "I know what I saw." "Then I need proof," Zara said, her voice taking on a determined edge. "I need something more than your word against his, or my father will never accept it. Thomas will claim you are lying, and my father will believe him because he wants to believe him." Vincent nodded slowly. "What if I could get Martha Crawford to speak with you? If she confirmed what I witnessed, would that be enough?" "It might be. But how would you convince her to speak? From what I understand, she is terrified of her son." "I do not know yet," Vincent admitted, "but I will find a way." Zara studied him for a long moment, and Vincent felt the weight of her gaze. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me. You have nothing to gain from interfering." "Because it is the right thing to do," Vincent said simply, "and because no one should have to marry a man who will hurt them." Something shifted in Zara's expression, a softening around her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Anders. Truly." "Call me Vincent." "Then you must call me Zara." She managed a small smile. "If we are going to be conspirators, we should at least be on a first-name basis." Despite the gravity of the situation, Vincent found himself smiling back. Agreed. They made a plan. Vincent would return to the Crawford ranch under the pretense of another delivery and try to speak with Martha when Thomas was away. Meanwhile, Zara would continue to act as though nothing had changed, maintaining her engagement so as not to alert Thomas that anything was wrong. Over the next 2 days, Vincent made inquiries and learned Thomas's schedule. Every Wednesday, Thomas rode into San Diego to conduct business, leaving early in the morning and not returning until evening. That gave Vincent a window of opportunity. On Wednesday morning, Vincent rode out to the Crawford ranch. His heart pounded as he approached the house, not knowing what he would find or how Martha would react to his presence. He had no official reason to be there today, no mail to deliver, and if Thomas returned early, things could turn dangerous quickly. He knocked on the door and waited. After a long moment, it opened a crack, and Martha Crawford peered out. Her face was still bruised from the beating Vincent had witnessed, yellow and purple marks marring her weathered skin. "Mrs. Crawford, my name is Vincent Anders. I delivered mail here a few days ago. I need to speak with you about your son." Martha's eyes widened with fear, and she tried to close the door, but Vincent put his hand against it gently. "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to help." "No one can help," she whispered, but she stopped trying to close the door. "I saw what he did to you. I saw him hit you and throw your grandson against the wall. I know what kind of man Thomas is." Tears welled up in Martha's eyes. "If he finds out you were here, if he knows I talked to you, he will kill me. He has threatened it before." Vincent's blood ran cold. "Then come with me. I will take you into town, to the sheriff." "The sheriff will not help. Thomas owns him, bought and paid for, and I cannot leave the children. Thomas would take his anger out on them." Vincent had not considered that, and the realization made him feel foolish. Of course she could not leave. She was trapped, bound by her love for her grandchildren and her fear of what Thomas would do if she defied him. "What if I told you there was a way to stop him?" Vincent said quietly. "What if you could help prevent him from hurting anyone else?" Martha stared at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. "How?" "Thomas is engaged to marry Zara Jenkins in less than 3 weeks. If we can convince her father that Thomas is dangerous, the engagement could be broken. But we need proof. We need you to tell Zara and her father what Thomas has done." Martha shook her head violently. "He would kill me. I am not brave enough." "You're braver than you think," Vincent said gently. "You have survived this long, protected those children as best you could. But Martha, if Thomas marries Zara, she will become another victim. And any children they have will grow up in the same hell that your grandchildren are living in now. You have the power to stop that." Martha's hands trembled as she clutched the door frame. She looked back into the house where Vincent could hear the children playing quietly in another room, and then back at him. "If I do this, you have to promise me something," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to promise that you will protect those children, that no matter what happens to me, they will be safe." Vincent's throat tightened. "I promise. Then I will do it. I will tell the truth." She straightened slightly, and Vincent saw a spark of defiance in her eyes. "But it has to be soon. I do not know how much longer I can endure this." They arranged for Martha to come into town on Friday, when Thomas would be attending a cattle auction in the next county. Vincent would meet her at the church, a neutral location where they could speak with Zara and her father, away from prying eyes. The next 2 days felt like an eternity. Vincent could barely eat or sleep, worried that something would go wrong, that Thomas would discover their plan, that Martha would lose her nerve. He spent his time riding his usual mail routes, but his mind was elsewhere. On Friday morning, Vincent arrived at the small church on the hill above Julian. It was a simple wooden structure with a white steeple, the kind of church that served as the heart of many frontier communities. Reverend Samuel Morrison, an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, had agreed to let them use his office for the meeting. Vincent had not told him the full details, only that it was a matter of great importance. Zara arrived first, her face pale but determined. She wore her Sunday dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was neatly braided. She greeted Vincent with a nod, too nervous to speak. William Jenkins arrived shortly after, looking annoyed and impatient. He was a stocky man in his late 50s with a thick mustache and a permanently skeptical expression. "This better be important, Anders. I have a business to run." "It is, sir. I promise you that." Martha was late, and with each passing minute, Vincent's anxiety grew. What if she had changed her mind? What if Thomas had come home early and discovered her plans? But finally, nearly half an hour past the appointed time, Martha arrived in a borrowed wagon, driven by a neighbor woman who knew nothing of the true purpose of the visit. Martha's face was set in grim determination, and the children were with her, wide-eyed and silent. Reverend Morrison agreed to watch the children in the sanctuary while the adults talked. Once they were settled in his small office, Martha began to speak. At first, her voice was hesitant and shaking, but as she continued, it grew stronger. She told them everything. About how Thomas had always been cruel, even as a child, torturing animals and bullying other children. About how his father had tried to discipline him, but ultimately failed. About how, after Robert Crawford died, Thomas's cruelty had intensified. She described beatings, threats, deliberate humiliations. She showed them scars on her arms where Thomas had burned her with a poker for serving dinner late. She told them about the night Thomas had thrown his father down the stairs after an argument about money and how she had been too afraid to tell anyone the truth. William Jenkins listened, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Martha finished, silence filled the small office. "Why did not you come forward before?" William asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I was afraid," Martha said simply. "Because I have no money, no home of my own, no way to support myself or my grandchildren. Because Thomas made it clear that if I ever spoke against him, he would make sure I ended up in an asylum and the children would go to an orphanage. Because no one would have believed me anyway." William turned to Vincent. "And you witnessed him striking her?" "Yes, sir. I saw him hit her twice across the face and throw the boy against the wall. That is when I knew I had to speak up." William stood and walked to the window, his back to them all. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Vincent held his breath, waiting for the older man's decision. Finally, William turned around, his eyes red. "Zara, you will not marry Thomas Crawford. I was a fool to push for this engagement, and I am sorry. I thought I was securing your future, but instead, I nearly condemned you to a life of misery." He looked at Martha. "Mrs. Crawford, you and your grandchildren will come stay above the livery stable. I have rooms there that are not being used. You will be safe." Martha began to cry, great heaving sobs of relief. Zara went to her and wrapped her arms around the older woman, tears streaming down her own face. Thank you," Martha whispered. "Thank you." But Vincent's mind was already racing ahead to the next problem. "Mr. Jenkins, when Thomas discovers that Martha is gone and the engagement is broken, he will come looking for answers. He is not the type of man to accept this quietly." "Let him come," William said grimly. "I will tell him the truth, that I know what kind of man he is, and my daughter will have nothing to do with him." "That could be dangerous," Vincent warned. "Then I will be prepared." William's jaw set stubbornly. "I am not without resources. I have a shotgun and friends who will stand with me." Zara looked at Vincent, her eyes full of gratitude and something else, something warm that made his heart skip. Thank you, Vincent. You saved my life. We all saved each other, Vincent said, feeling embarrassed by her praise. None of us could have done this alone. They moved Martha and the children into the rooms above the livery that very day. The space was dusty and had been used for storage, but with some cleaning, it became livable. Several women from the church, once they heard that Martha had left her son's house, came to help, bringing linens, dishes, and food. No one asked too many questions, understanding that sometimes a woman needed to leave and the reasons were her own. Vincent stayed close, knowing that Thomas would return from the cattle auction by nightfall and would discover Martha gone. Sure enough, just after sunset, Thomas Crawford came thundering into town on his horse, his face twisted with rage. He went directly to the livery stable and pounded on the door. William Jenkins met him outside, shotgun in hand. Vincent stood nearby, his hand near his colt, ready to intervene if necessary. Several other men from town, alerted to the possibility of trouble, had also gathered, watching from a distance. "Where is she?" Thomas demanded. "Where is my mother?" "She is safe, and that is all you need to know," William said calmly. "She belongs in my house. I am her family." "You are her abuser," William said flatly. "I know what you have done, Thomas. The beatings, the threats, the cruelty. Martha told us everything, and I will tell you this right now. My daughter will not be marrying you. The engagement is off." Thomas's face turned purple with rage. "You cannot do that. We have an agreement. I invested money in your business." "Then I will pay you back, every penny, but Zara will not marry you." Thomas took a threatening step forward, and instantly William raised the shotgun, pointing it directly at Thomas's chest. Vincent's hand moved to his colt, drawing it smoothly. The other men in the street tensed, ready to act. "I would not do that if I were you," Vincent said quietly. "You are outnumbered and outgunned." Thomas looked around, seeing the hostile faces, the weapons, the solidarity. For the first time, Vincent saw something like fear flicker in the man's eyes. He was a bully and a coward, dangerous only when he had power over those weaker than himself. "This is not over," Thomas snarled. "I will sue you for breach of contract. I will ruin you, Jenkins." "You can try," William said, "but I think once people hear the truth about you, your reputation will be worth less than dirt. Now get off my property before I lose my patience." Thomas stood there for another long moment, his hands clenched into fists, his whole body shaking with impotent rage. Then he spat in the dirt, mounted his horse, and rode off into the darkness. Everyone let out a collective breath. The immediate danger had passed, but Vincent knew this was not truly over. Men like Thomas Crawford did not accept defeat gracefully. He would lick his wounds and plot revenge. Over the following days, Thomas tried various tactics. He went to Sheriff Dalton and accused William Jenkins of harboring his mother against her will. The sheriff, to his credit, actually came to investigate, but after speaking with Martha privately and seeing the bruises she still bore, he told Thomas there was nothing he could do. Martha was a grown woman and could live where she chose. Thomas hired a lawyer from San Diego and threatened to sue William for breach of contract, but the lawyer quickly discovered that there was no written agreement, only a verbal one, and without documentation of the financial investment Thomas claimed to have made, there was no case. Desperate and humiliated, Thomas tried to turn public opinion against William and Martha, spreading rumors that Martha was senile and had been manipulated by Vincent and Zara. But the people of Julian were not fools. They had heard whispers about Thomas Crawford for years, and now that Martha was safe enough to speak, others began to come forward with their own stories. A ranch hand who had worked for Thomas briefly described the brutal beatings he had witnessed. A housekeeper who had lasted only 2 weeks spoke of Thomas's violent temper. Slowly, the truth came to light, and Thomas found himself increasingly isolated. Through all of this, Vincent found himself spending more and more time with Zara. At first, it was simply practical. He helped move furniture for Martha, repaired a loose board in the stairs leading to her new home, and kept watch at night to make sure Thomas did not try anything foolish. But gradually, his visits became about more than just protection. He and Zara would sit on the porch of the livery in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Julian, about her mother who had died when she was 15, about her dreams of someday having her own horse ranch. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his family to fever when he was 18, about drifting west looking for a place to belong. "Do you think you will ever settle down?" she asked one evening as they watched the sunset over the hills. "I never thought I would," Vincent admitted. "I figured I would just keep moving from town to town, always on the trail. But lately, I've been thinking that maybe Julian is a place where I could put down roots." Zara smiled, and in the fading light, she was so beautiful that Vincent felt his breath catch. "I think Julian would be lucky to have you stay." "I think I would be lucky to have a reason to stay," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. The air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken feelings. Zara's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked away, but she was smiling. As summer turned to autumn, Vincent and Zara grew closer. They went on long rides together through the hills, ostensibly so Vincent could show her good trails for her future horse ranch, but really just to spend time together. They worked side by side, helping Martha settle into her new life and caring for the children, who slowly began to lose the haunted look in their eyes and act like normal, happy youngsters. Martha blossomed in her freedom. Away from Thomas's cruelty, she proved to be a vibrant woman with a sharp wit and a generous spirit. She began helping at the church, teaching the children's Sunday school class, and became a beloved figure in the community. William Jenkins, for his part, proved to be a man of honor. When Thomas finally gave up his threats and slithered back to his ranch, William paid back every penny he claimed Thomas had invested, even though there was no legal obligation to do so. He did it to clear his conscience and to make sure his daughter's future was free from any taint of obligation. One evening in late October, Vincent came to the livery stable and asked to speak with William privately. His heart hammered in his chest as he followed the older man into the office. "Sir, I would like your permission to court your daughter properly, with the intention of marriage if she will have me." William studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. "I think Zara has been waiting for you to ask for weeks now. Yes, Vincent, you have my permission and my blessing. You are a good man, and I know you will treat her well." Relief and joy flooded through Vincent. "Thank you, sir. I promise I will." "I know you will. If I did not believe that, we would not be having this conversation." Vincent found Zara in the corral, working with Daisy, the chestnut mare she had been training months ago. The horse was calm now, responding beautifully to Zara's gentle commands. "Zara, can I talk to you?" She turned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Of course. What is it?" Vincent climbed over the fence and walked to her, his hat in his hands. "I spoke with your father. I asked his permission to court you properly." Zara's eyes widened. "What did he say?" "He said yes." Vincent took a deep breath. "Zara Jenkins, I know we have only known each other a few months, but in that time, you have become the most important person in my world. You are kind, brave, and strong. You make me want to be a better man. I would be honored if you would allow me to court you, and if, in time, you might consider becoming my wife." Tears glistened in Zara's eyes, but she was smiling. "Vincent Anders, I have been waiting for you to say something like that for weeks now. Yes, I will let you court me. Yes, I will absolutely consider becoming your wife. In fact, I have already considered it quite thoroughly, and my answer is yes to that too." Vincent laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. They courted for 3 months, though everyone in Julian knew they would marry. It was a happy time, full of laughter and hope. Vincent took a job working for William at the livery, learning the business and proving himself to be a hard worker with a natural way with horses. Zara began making plans for her ranch, and Vincent promised that they would build it together. In January of 1879, on a crisp winter day with clear blue skies, Vincent and Zara were married in the little church on the hill. Martha stood beside Zara as her matron of honor, tears of joy streaming down her face. William walked his daughter down the aisle with pride shining in his eyes. The children, now happy and healthy, served as ring bearers. The whole town came to the wedding, packing the small church to capacity. Even Sheriff Dalton attended, acknowledging with his presence that justice had been served in its own way. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony, his voice full of warmth as he spoke about love, courage, and the power of doing what is right even when it is difficult. When Vincent kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Thomas Crawford was not there, of course. He had become a pariah in Julian, and shortly after Christmas, word spread that he had sold his ranch and moved to Los Angeles. No one mourned his departure. The land was purchased by a family from San Francisco, good people who treated their workers well and became valued members of the community. Vincent and Zara moved into a small house on the edge of town, a modest place with a large yard perfect for horses. William gave them Daisy as a wedding present, and she became the foundation of their breeding stock. Over the next year, they saved every penny and began purchasing land for their ranch. Martha continued to live above the livery stable, but she was a constant presence in Vincent and Zara's life, helping with the horses and becoming the grandmother figure that Zara had never had. The children thrived, attending school and growing strong and confident. The boy, James, showed a natural talent with horses and began working at the livery alongside William. The girl, Emma, proved to be artistically gifted and spent hours drawing the horses and landscapes around Julian. In the spring of 1880, Zara discovered she was pregnant. Vincent was beside himself with joy, treating her like precious china, though she laughed and insisted she was perfectly capable of doing her normal work. Martha fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. On a warm September evening, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Robert, after Vincent's father and Thomas Crawford's father, the good man who had built the Crawford Ranch. It felt right to honor that memory, to reclaim the name from the shadow Thomas had cast over it. Vincent held his son in his arms and felt a love so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. He looked at Zara, exhausted but radiant, and then at Martha, who stood nearby with tears of happiness in her eyes. "Thank you," he said to Martha, "for being brave enough to tell the truth, for trusting me. None of this would have happened without you." "No," Martha said softly. "Thank you, Vincent. You gave me my life back. You gave my grandchildren hope, and you gave Zara the love she deserves. I am the one who is grateful." Over the next few years, Vincent and Zara's ranch grew and prospered. They bred fine horses that became sought after throughout California. They hired good workers and treated them fairly, building a reputation for integrity that brought them steady business. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Grace in 1882 and another son named William in 1884, named after Zara's father, who had become one of Vincent's closest friends and advisors. Martha lived with them for the rest of her life, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1891 at the age of 73. She died surrounded by love, having spent her final years in happiness and security. Her grandchildren, James and Emma, grew into fine adults. James took over management of the Jenkins livery when William retired, and Emma married a teacher from San Diego and moved there, though she visited Julian often. Vincent and Zara's marriage became the stuff of local legend, the kind of love story people told to illustrate that good things happen to those who stand up for what is right. They faced challenges, of course. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and financial setbacks. But they faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Zara on a ride up into the hills above their ranch. It was the same trail they had ridden together when they were courting, and the view was just as beautiful as he remembered. They dismounted and stood looking out over the valley, their land stretching out below them. "Do you remember the first time I spoke to you?" Vincent asked, his arm around Zara's waist. "When I came to the livery to tell you about Thomas." "Of course I remember," Zara said, leaning into his embrace. "I was terrified, but also relieved that someone finally saw through Thomas's facade. I was so nervous. I had no idea how you would react, whether you would believe me or think I was crazy." Zara turned to face him, her hands resting on his chest. "I believed you because I could see the truth in your eyes. You were not seeking glory or reward. You were just trying to do the right thing. That is when I first started falling in love with you, I think, even before I admitted it to myself. I think I started falling in love with you the first time I saw you working with that skittish mare, being so patient and gentle. I thought to myself, there is a woman with a good heart. And then when I got to know you, I discovered you were so much more than that. You were brave and strong and funny and kind. You were everything I had ever hoped to find." They kissed as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, their children played in the yard of the ranch house, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising a warm fire and a good meal waiting for them. As they rode back down the hill toward home, Vincent reflected on how much his life had changed in 10 years. He had gone from being a lonely drifter to a man with a wife he adored, children he cherished, a thriving business, and a place in a community that respected him. All because he had made the choice to speak up when he witnessed injustice, to not turn away when doing so would have been easier. He thought about Thomas Crawford sometimes, wondered what had become of him in Los Angeles. He hoped the man had changed, though he doubted it. Men like Thomas rarely did. But Vincent did not dwell on it. His life was full of light and love, and there was no room for darkness. The years continued to pass in contentment. Robert, their eldest, grew into a strong young man with his father's sense of justice and his mother's way with horses. He took naturally to ranch work and eventually became Vincent's partner in running the business. Grace was spirited and independent, reminding everyone of her mother, and she shocked the community by becoming one of the first female horse trainers in California, earning recognition throughout the state. William, the youngest, inherited his grandfather's business acumen and helped expand the ranch's operations into neighboring counties. Vincent and Zara grew old together gracefully. Vincent's dark hair turned silver and lines creased his face, but his eyes remained sharp and kind. Zara's beauty matured into something even more striking, a radiance that came from a life well lived and love deeply felt. They celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Robert had married and given them 2 grandsons and a granddaughter. Grace, independent to the last, remained single but happy, running her own training facility. William had just gotten engaged to a wonderful young woman from San Diego. At the anniversary celebration held at the ranch house they had built together, William Jenkins, now in his 80s and moving slowly but still sharp-minded, stood to make a toast. 25 years ago, I nearly made the worst mistake of my life, he said, his voice carrying through the crowded room. I almost forced my daughter to marry a terrible man because I thought I knew what was best for her. But a brave young mail courier had the courage to speak up, to tell the truth even when it would have been easier to stay silent. Vincent Anders saved my daughter's life, and in doing so, he gave all of us this family, this love, this happiness. So I raise my glass to Vincent and Zara, to the life they have built, and to the courage it takes to do what is right. Everyone raised their glasses, and Vincent felt tears prick his eyes. He looked at Zara, who was also crying, and they held hands tightly. I want to say something too, Zara said, standing. Vincent, you have been my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life for 25 years. You have supported my dreams, raised our children with patience and wisdom, and shown me every single day what it means to be truly loved. I thank God for the day you rode into Julian, for your courage in speaking up, and for every moment we have had together since then. Here is to 25 more years. At least, Vincent added, making everyone laugh. The party continued late into the night, full of music and laughter and joy. As Vincent watched his family celebrating around him, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had not set out to be a hero. He had simply seen a wrong and tried to make it right. But that one choice, that one moment of courage, had changed everything. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Vincent and Zara sat on their porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the cool evening air. The stars stretched out above them, countless and brilliant. Do you have any regrets? Zara asked softly. Vincent thought about it seriously. No, he said finally, not a single one. My life turned out better than I ever imagined it could. What about you? None, Zara said firmly, except maybe that I wish I had met you sooner so we could have had even more years together. Vincent kissed the top of her head. We have had enough time to build something beautiful, a family, a home, a legacy of love. That is more than most people ever get. They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently on the swing. The ranch stretched out before them, the buildings they had constructed together, the corrals full of fine horses, the land they had worked and nurtured. This was their kingdom, built not on violence or wealth or power, but on love, hard work, and the courage to stand up for what was right. Vincent thought back to that day in 1878 when he had looked through the window of the Crawford ranch and seen Thomas hitting his mother. He had faced a choice in that moment: turn away and mind his own business, or get involved and risk everything. He had chosen to get involved, and that choice had led him to this moment, sitting on a porch swing with the woman he loved, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. "I love you," he said to Zara, the words as true and powerful as the first time he had spoken them. "I love you too," she replied, snuggling closer to him. "Always and forever." The years that followed were gentle ones. Vincent and Zara gradually handed over the day-to-day operations of the ranch to Robert, though they remained involved and active. They took more time to travel, visiting Emma in San Diego and taking a memorable trip to San Francisco. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly and delighted in watching the next generation grow. Vincent remained involved in the Julian community, serving on the town council and working to improve schools and roads. He became known as a man of wisdom and fairness, someone people came to when they needed advice or help settling disputes. He never forgot the lesson he had learned all those years ago, that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult or dangerous, is always worth doing. Zara continued to work with horses well into her 60s, though she focused more on teaching others her methods rather than doing the physical training herself. She wrote a small book about horse training techniques that became surprisingly popular among ranchers throughout California. She also became a mentor to young women who wanted to work with horses, encouraging them to pursue their dreams despite societal expectations. In 1905, Vincent and Zara celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. By then, they had 7 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. The ranch had become one of the most successful horse breeding operations in Southern California, known for quality animals and ethical practices. The anniversary celebration was even larger than the 25th had been, with people coming from all over the state to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the region. During the celebration, Robert stood to make a speech. He was a man in his 40s now, strong and capable, with his own wife and children. "My parents taught me many things," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "How to train a horse, how to run a business, how to treat people with respect. But the most important lesson they taught me was about courage. My father could have looked away when he saw injustice. He could have decided it was not his problem. But he chose to get involved, to speak up, to do what was right even though it was risky. And my mother had the courage to believe him, to break off an engagement that would have destroyed her, to risk disgrace and hardship for the sake of truth. Their courage gave them each other, gave them us, gave all of us this family. That is the legacy I hope to pass on to my children." Vincent was crying openly by the end of the speech, as was everyone else in the room. He held Zara close, marveling at how blessed he had been. As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Vincent and Zara found themselves once again sitting on their porch swing, just as they had on so many nights before. They were older now, their movements slower, their bodies marked by the passage of time. But their love was as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered so many years together. 50 years, Zara said wonderingly. "Can you believe it has been 50 years? "It feels like both forever and no time at all," Vincent said. "I remember the first time I saw you like it was yesterday. You were working with that mare, so patient and gentle. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And I remember the day you came to warn me about Thomas. You were so nervous, twisting your hat in your hands, but your eyes were steady and honest. I knew I could trust you." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Vincent felt the weight of his years, the aches in his bones, the tiredness that came more easily now. But he also felt profound peace. He had lived a good life. He had loved and been loved. He had raised children who were happy and successful. He had built something meaningful and lasting. "Promise me something," Zara said softly. "Anything. Promise that wherever we go after this life, we will find each other again." Vincent turned to look at her, his heart swelling with love. "I promise. In this life and whatever comes after, you are mine and I am yours. Nothing will ever change that." They kissed, a tender meeting of lips that spoke of 50 years of love and countless moments shared. The stars shone above them, and the ranch was quiet and peaceful around them. Their family slept safely in the houses scattered across the property. Everything was as it should be. Vincent and Zara lived several more years, enjoying their children and grandchildren, watching their family grow and prosper. They remained devoted to each other until the very end. Vincent passed away first in 1912, at the age of 81. He died peacefully in his sleep, Zara holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you. I will wait for you." Zara followed him 2 years later, in 1914, at the age of 78. She had lived those 2 years with grace and dignity, though everyone could see she missed Vincent terribly. She spent her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories of the old days and making sure the family remembered where they came from. When she died, it was also peaceful, surrounded by family. Her last words were, "I am coming, Vincent. Wait for me." They were buried side by side in the Julian Cemetery, under a large oak tree on the hillside. Their headstone was simple but elegant, engraved with their names, dates, and a single line, "Together in life, together in eternity." The ranch continued under Robert's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The Anders family became a fixture in Julian for generations, always known for their integrity, kindness, and excellent horses. And every generation told the story of how it all began, how a cowboy named Vincent Anders had the courage to speak up when he witnessed injustice, and how that one act of bravery had created a legacy of love that lasted far beyond his lifetime. The story became part of Julian's history, told and retold, a reminder that one person's courage can change everything, that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult or dangerous, is always worth doing, that love built on respect, trust, and shared values can last forever. And so the legacy of Vincent and Zara Anders lived on, not just in their descendants, but in the very character of the community they had helped shape. Julian became known as a town where people looked out for each other, where injustice was not tolerated, where love and family were valued above all else. That was the true gift Vincent and Zara left behind, more valuable than any ranch or any amount of money. Years turned to decades, and decades to generations, but the story remained. In the Anders family, it was tradition that every child, upon reaching adulthood, would be taken to their great-great-grandparents' grave and told the full story of how Vincent had witnessed Thomas Crawford's cruelty and made the brave choice to speak up, how Zara had the courage to break her engagement despite the consequences, how they had fallen in love and built a life together based on integrity and compassion. Remember, the parents would tell their children, "You come from people who did what was right even when it was hard. That is your heritage. That is who you are meant to be." And the children would listen, standing under that oak tree, looking at the simple headstone, and they would understand. They came from love. They came from courage. They came from two people who, when faced with a choice between convenience and integrity, chose integrity every single time. That was the true happy ending. Not just that Vincent and Zara found each other and lived a long, happy life together, though they did. Not just that they built a successful ranch and raised wonderful children, though they did that too. The real happy ending was that their choice to stand up against evil created ripples that spread far beyond their own lives, touching generation after generation, making the world just a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit braver. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Vincent and Zara walked together hand in hand, still in love, still partners, still the same two people who had met in Julian, California in 1878 and changed each other's lives forever. The cowboy who could not let her marry a man who abused his family, and the woman who had the courage to believe him and choose love over fear. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their legacy secure. And in the end, that was everything that mattered. They had loved well, lived well, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for?